Noon. Hello. I might just ask you all to scoot in a little bit if possible, so if we have any latecomers, they can tack on to the end.
Well, that's cool. The guy at the front desk when I got here said, "Oh, I think there's 30 tickets sold." I'm like,
No, he was wrong. There was 113. All right. We're going to go ahead and get started. Hello, my name is Caitlin Bell. I am the Gene Jones Director of Public Programs here at the Nevada Museum of Art. Thank you for joining us for today's Art Bite on Maynard Dixon in Northwestern Nevada. Sagebrush and Solitude Maynard Dixon in Nevada is located on the 3rd floor and is on view until July 27th. I can't believe that we're almost to the end stretch here. Thank you to all our many generous sponsors, and thank you to our visitors, volunteers, and members of the museum. We are going to have some time for Q&A today. We will be passing around mics so that we can capture it on, capture your voices and questions on our recording today. I'd like to introduce you to today's speaker. Carolyn Dufurrena came west several decades ago to live life in the Nevada desert. She is the author of a recent book of poems called Quiet, Except for the Wind, and has been a regular contributor to Range magazine. She was lead writer for C.J. Hadley's award-winning Face to Face with the American West in 2022 and has contributed to several others. She has been a regular performer at the National Cowboy Poetry Gathering in Elko, Nevada, and pops up at various other venues in the West to share poems and stories. She is part of the Nevada Arts Council's Artists in Schools and Communities, which brings creative writing and short film workshops to rural students. She is a member of the Board of Trustees of Women Writing the West. She and her husband, Tim, work and live on the Quinn River Ranch in the Nevada desert, where they raise cattle, alfalfa, and registered American quarter horses. Welcome, Carolyn.
Thanks, Caitlin. It's wonderful to see you all here. I see some familiar faces that I haven't run across in some time, so welcome. I'm so happy that you're here. Yes, just to add to what Caitlin said, when I came to Nevada, it was as an exploration geologist. My former life, I lived in Denver and brought my Bronco out to this part of the world and drove around looking for uranium in the 70s. And after 3 Mile Island, that stopped abruptly, which was probably a good thing. Along the way, I met this great cowboy, and as my uncle said, the rest is history. So anyway, that brought me into this ranching country, and so you'll hear some geology talk in the middle of all this art talk too. So Maynard Dixon, I'm going to apologize ahead of time for if I mess up the remote. And if I step away too far from the mic, my friends here in the front row are going to wave at me. Okay, so ready, go. So in 1927, Maynard Dixon was 52 years old. He was at the height of his powers and had exhibitions that summer all over the country. His wife, Dorothea, was in San Francisco raising their baby son and trying to pursue her own career as a documentary photographer. And she was also taking care of Maynard's daughter, Kanzi, from his first marriage. Kanzi was 17 and she did not like Dorothea, who was only a few years older than she. So there was some conflict there. And you might think, well, maybe Maynard thought it was a good time to go on a painting trip. So, James Scrugham was the outgoing governor of the state of Nevada, and he had just bought the Alder Creek Ranch in Humboldt County from Miller and Lux, and which was by then doing business as the Pacific Livestock Company. Scrugham had two partners, a Colonel Tom Miller and a gentleman named Bill Dressler. And the Dressler name is well known in Nevada still today as an old-time ranching family. Dressler was the manager, and he would eventually end up with the ranch after some other things happened. Well, it's not clear how Maynard got connected with Scrugham, but Don Haggerty believes that Scrugham may have met Dixon in his studio in San Francisco. So, the governor had ambitions to make Alder Creek a dude ranch. When I first read this, I thought, oh, nonsense. But he did, although he was ultimately unsuccessful, he did invite some of his very important friends to come out to the ranch at the same time that Maynard Dixon was painting out there that summer. Okay. Dixon was in Reno at the end of June, visiting Pyramid Lake and allegedly sketching out there, although I've not seen any images from that particular trip. But he traveled by Southern Pacific Railroad to Winnemucca in early July, where he rendezvoused with Frank Tobin. So Frank was 26 years old that year, half of Dixon's age, and he was a twin, identical to his brother Phil. So Phil or Frank and Phil. And their younger brother Jack is over here. This is their dad, C.L. Tobin. And of course, Phil became famous a couple of years later as the politician who introduced the bill that legalized gambling in the state of Nevada. So, changed everybody's future. He's the one that everybody knows about. He's the famous one. And Frank is really hard to find information about. They grew up as many ranchers' kids did between a house in town and the Banks Ranch, also known as the Circle Bar, which is about 5 miles east of Winnemucca on the river, on the Humboldt River. CL was primarily a banker, and he turned the ranch over to the twins when they were still in high school and moved to Eureka on some banking enterprise or other. And he would sell the place to the brothers when they were 21. Think about that for a second. By 1920, okay, so here's a picture of them when they're children. This house still exists in Winnemucca. It's right by the railroad tracks. But here are the twins and Jack in their buggy getting ready to go home to the ranch. And by 1927, the brothers were running 800 head of cattle on 70,000 acres of open rangeland north of the river. Okay, so according to the recollections of John and Daniel Dixon, let me see if I get this right. Okay. According to recollections of John and Daniel Dixon, which were recorded as oral history conversations in the Thunderbird Remembers, Maynard preferred to travel at horseback speeds or perhaps by buckboard. Almost every afternoon, said Dan, we pulled over and stopped when they traveled as a family so he could make sketches. John added of their trip to Taos, we'd pull off to the side and Maynard would haul out some piece of paper, sometimes the back of an old letter or a piece of a cardboard box, and make a quick little sketch together with a few handwritten notations. He was gathering material there in the desert, the way researchers gather material in a library. So the question comes up, how did Maynard Dixon and Frank Tobin get to Alder Creek? Alder Creek Ranch is 120 miles northwest of Winnemucca. In 1927, there were no paved roads, there were no highways, even dirt road highways, no improved gravel roads from one place to the other. Travel was primarily on two rut tracks that went from ranch to ranch. So Cane Springs to Happy Creek to Quinn River. This was the crossing at Quinn River Ranch in 1909. And Quinn River, thence to Cowboys. So Miller and Lux at that time was still a big, or Quinn River at that time was still a pretty big Miller and Lux ranch with lots of, old-time Western business. You would think if Maynard Dixon had spent any time there at all, he would have maybe made a few sketches here, you would think. Anyway, so then here's the road to Bramlett Station, which was the stage road at that time. So that's how a person would go. My husband and I have had many conversations about this because he says, oh, there were roads everywhere. They could have gone this road, they could have gone that road, but this was the stagecoach road. And they would have had to go all the way to the state line, which is, okay, so I'm sorry about the quality of this map, but it's the best I could do. This is actually from 1930, so it's a little bit later when there actually was a designated highway, 8A, which ran from Winnemucca to wherever in California. Anyway, so here's Winnemucca. This would have been the road. This is Paradise Hill. Cane Springs would have been this one stage stop here. Then Happy Creek Ranch is here. Quinn River is there. Brahma Station, or what we call Brahma Station, is like a little bit off the beaten path of the highway today over here. And then they would have gone all the way up to Denio and then come back on this road over here and down to Alder Creek eventually. Let's see. Okay, so the alternative, which I've been thinking about, the stagecoach in the mid-20s was an automobile, not a buckboard or a freight wagon, although it had been pretty recently before that. It was an automobile that made the 100-mile trip from Winnemucca to Denio in one day. The stage carried freight, passengers, and mail up until the 1990s. And this isn't part of the talk, but I have to tell you this. When I taught school in Denio for quite a long time, and one year I had two sisters whose parents were gone for a semester who stayed with me, and they would ride the school bus up to Denio from Quinn River, go to school all day, and on Friday afternoon at recess, they would take their little suitcases and walk over to the post office and catch the stage back to Winnemucca where their mother met them. And it was a van at that time, and they'd always make cookies Thursday night to give to the driver because, he was a little cranky. So the stagecoach ran, and they still called it that, the Denio stage. All right, so carried freight, passengers, and mail up until the 1990s. And it's certainly possible, I think, that Frank and Maynard would have taken the stage as far as Denio, just so they could get there. It was the nearest town to Alder Creek, 21 miles away. And in the mid-20s, Denio was kind of a happening place. It had 3 saloons, 2 hotels, and a store. 30,000 sheep were sheared there every year as well. So there was a lot of activity, and many more people lived there then than do now. Oh, here's Denio. I'm not sure when exactly this photograph was taken, but it was a while ago. This came from the Facebook page. There's a Historic Denio Fields Facebook page that's run by a gentleman named Jerry Holloway. And if you're interested in history of that part of the world, it's a great place to wander around. Okay, so Dixon and Tobin could have had somebody from the ranch come and pick them up in Denio. This is the Alder Creek Denio Road today. And this is the road that they would have taken. It's pretty good. It's all sand, so it's not very bumpy. So Dixon left no recorded images that I've been able to find of the east side of the Pine Forest Range or that trip out to Denio. So that would make sense to me if they were riding the stagecoach and it was pelting along at 25 miles an hour for 100 miles in the middle of the day. So to Alder Creek, and if you've seen the show, you've seen this image upstairs. The ranch, this is the main headquarters of the ranch, and it is in a north-facing canyon, which if you're a painter, that's the light you want. It really takes advantage of the richness of the desert light. And I have to say, an art teacher friend of mine from Minnesota studied Dixon in school in Minneapolis, and she thought that his colors were totally romantic and completely unreal. And then she moved to Winnemucca and said, oh, no, this is documentary. So Dixon stayed in the bunkhouse at Alder Creek. The bunkhouse is still there and has been renovated and looks fancier than this. But he would have had a really good view of the desert light changing in the afternoons. This painting is of the Pueblo Mountains, probably from that bunkhouse porch or close to it. And this painting surfaced about a month ago. I had never seen it before, but Don Haggerty, who is, Dixon's primary biographer, I guess, sent me this picture and said, look what I found. So it showed up in Los Angeles at a gallery and was immediately snapped up by a collector. And it was of these mountains. These are the Pueblos. It's a Linda Dufurrena image. So Dixon painted around the ranch, I think. Looking at just the dates that he signed his paintings with, I speculate, a lot of this talk is speculation, obviously, but I speculate that he did a lot of his paintings around the ranch initially, just getting used to the environment. This horse barn is still there, although it's been added on to and fancied up some. Also, I thought that he would have done this painting right before he left, but it was pointed out to me that it was dated August by one of my editor people. And so just a note about this, he painted this on the bunkhouse wall, or he tacked a piece of tent canvas to the bunkhouse wall and painted this image. And allegedly left it in the bunkhouse. However, people who live up in that part of the world remember seeing this tacked up on the wall in the main ranch house kitchen. So it was there, and the kitchen is a big space. It's not, like tiny. It's big ranch house kitchen. So again, speculating, but Janet Johnson, who now lives at Alder Creek and is part of the ownership there, speculates that the Bacardos, who bought the ranch in the 50s and kept it in the 50s into the 60s, when they sold the ranch, they might have rolled this up and taken it with them, because that was about when it disappeared. Until recently, when it reappeared upstairs. Okay, so Dixon painted around the ranch for a while, and then moved up into the mountains, into the Pine Forest Range. Dixon and Tobin set up their camp in the south end of Onion Meadow, again a north-facing vista. And this is where the drawings of Tobin's camp and cowboy and gear are set. Oh, no, I didn't mess that up. That's good. The cowboy in this drawing has got to be Frank Tobin, because he was the camp tender. So I think that that's who is portrayed there. So Frank, as guide and camp tender, would have been responsible for cooking and moving supplies from one location to the other at Dixon's direction. So what would camp tending for a painter look like? One recollection of Frank, which was published in the Humboldt Historian, a quarterly of the North Central Nevada Historical Society, records that he had been camp tending in the summer following, so this is the summer of 1928, for a Basque herder and a band of sheep in the Santa Rosa Mountains. He was a frequent and welcome visitor at the Bell Mining Camp on Buckskin Mountain, which is south of McDermott. According to Laura Bell, the author, quote, "He would stretch his 6 feet of long-legged brawn and announce that he was ready to extend his visit to 3 days as a mannerly indication that we had not done anything to displease him." She notes that if a guest stayed fewer than 3 days, that would mean that they had failed as hosts. So sometimes we wondered how, this is Laura Bell continuing, sometimes we wondered how Frank found time at the sheep camp to cook the rice and raisins and bake the delicious white sourdough bread that his Basque sheep herder required. He managed, though, mixing and kneading the dough, letting it rise and kneading it again, and then putting it in the big fire-blackened Dutch oven with a rim around the cast iron cover to hold a layer of coals and burying it in the campfire to bake. This is our Dufurrena sheep camp a few years ago, but we had for many years a regular camp tender who stayed in camp, cooked the meals, made sure that the herders who were in and out with the bands of sheep had a place to come and sit in a lawn chair and drink wine and watch the fire. Laura Bell continues. Frank would have carried the sourdough starter, a lump of soft dough in the flour sack, which with the rest of the supplies was hung from the burro's pack saddle when camp was moved. He would likely have brought a quarter of spring lamb from one of the sheep camps scattered around the pine forest range. Miller and Luck's sheep headquarters was at Knott Creek, a few miles south of Alder Creek in those days. And so there would have been many sheep scattered around the top of that mountain all summer long. And I wonder if Dixon's portrait, which is called the Basco, and was exhibited at the Riverside exhibition that fall, was likely a sheep herder. Laura says also, Frank was endlessly entertaining. His breezy conversation enlivening life on the mountain after the painting day was finished. According to Mrs. Bell, he wore his Stetson hat at a rakish angle over his handsome, weather-darkened face. A small black silk kerchief tied round his neck, his long legs encased in tight denim, nearly dragged the ground on either side of a fat little mule. So this is northwest from Pine Forest, painted somewhere up on top of the north end of that mountain range. When Dixon arrived in the Denio country, he discovered a tremendous variety of landscape. Pine Forest Range is near the very edge of the Great Basin physiographic province. This is the geology part of the talk. So from the high ridges, you can see across the valley the broad volcanic mesas of the beginning of the Columbia Plateau. And this as well up here. Oh, dang it, wait. So up here, so this is still Basin and Range. These are the Pueblo Mountains, and this is Oregon. It's the Columbia Plateau. So it's a fairly sharp boundary. Anyway, also to the southwest is the extinct volcano of the Virgin Valley caldera, which once held a series of lakes fed by hydrothermal springs and in which fire opals simmer. So this is Eagle's Roost. The high ridges of the pine forest range were carved into rugged alpine valleys and scoured by glaciers, if you can believe that. There are only a couple of mountain ranges in the state of Nevada that are glaciated, and the pine forest is one. The rubies are another. Some of the boulders that Dixon painted were transported by glaciers and scattered in glacial moraines around the meadows, which seasonally filled with alpine lakes. I thought initially that this rock right here was that rock. I'm not sure. So here's another image of the meadow. So 25 years after Dixon was there that summer, the new owners of Alder Creek Ranch, the Bacardo family, developed this meadow and Knot Creek Meadow into reservoirs to support irrigation on the ranches below. So completely different scene today. But that summer, this is what the meadow looked like. Now, today, this is where the dam is, I believe, that holds the water back. But where am I? Oh, okay. So horses are roaming across this painting of Dixon's, and they could have been ranch horses. They could have been Mustangs. Horses were very, very abundant in this part of the country in the 20s. Ranchers let their horses range freely all year in those days, and they would gather them as soon as the snow melted in the spring when they were easier to catch. The good ones, they started for saddle horses, and the culls were taken off the range. Ranchers put well-bred stallions out with these wild bunches of mares to upgrade the horses' conformation and mellow their attitudes. John B. Dufurrena, my husband's uncle, who grew up at Alder Creek, just east of Denio, says that there were bands of Mustangs in every canyon in the 1920s. And the Humboldt Star recorded that summer that railroad cars full of horses were sent to California and Chicago every week. Not being adopted. Okay, by August, so Governor Scrugham decided that he would bring some friends to Alder Creek for the opening of sage hen season. There was as much hoorah about sage hens in the 20s in this part of the country as there is today. And so he invited, according to the Humboldt Star, a veritable mob of 20 of his closest friends who came from Reno and parts east on the train to gather at Alder Creek for the opening of sage hen season that weekend. The president of the Bank of America, an A. Delafield, was among the party and brought his film camera to record images of the birds. The hundreds of birds that were supposed to be there. Not only did they not shoot any sage hen, they did not see any sage hen. Not one. So they all left crankily, one would imagine. Dixon left. I want to imagine that as soon as those carloads of fancy folk showed up, he packed his gear and headed west. His paintings from Virgin Valley are all, almost the ones that I've seen are dated August. And the light in them suggests that it was high summer when he was out there. So it's not hard to imagine why he would leave with all those folks there. I apologize for the quality of this slide, but it's the best I could do. So Alder Creek is here, and this is the road to Virgin Valley, the opal fields, and this dot right here, Camp Sheldon, was a CCC camp in the 30s. So it would be a distance of, or a journey of several miles in those days by automobile, and probably a solid day on horseback. So this is inside Virgin Valley. And you can see, so imagining that this is the central collapse caldera of a volcano, you can see these high rims that pretty much go in a circle around the Central Valley. It's a high circular rim of red volcanic flows, and it is cut by the gorge of Thousand Creek. So this is what the rim looks like, and this gorge is just spectacular. I don't remember exactly, but I think it's 800 or 900 feet deep. Anyway, and you'll see several sketches and paintings of the gorge that he did during that period. This is what it looks like today from the top end. Okay, so this painting is called Lonesome Valley. It is not from this place or time. It's, I want to say, earlier, but it reminds me very much of the ranch that was in this Central Valley, and it was a ranch that was owned by Tom Dufurrena, who was my husband's great uncle. He and his brother Alex both came from the Basque Country in the early years of the early 1900s and developed ranches in this part of the world. He ran sheep and cattle in an isolated place like this is depicted until 1934. Let's see, and in the wintertime, so their summer headquarters would have been up here in Virgin Valley, and in the wintertime, they moved down onto the flat and had another place called Thousand Creek, and there are sketches of Thousand Creek upstairs as well, although not necessarily of the ranch. One of the things that is a really prominent feature inside this caldera are these layered sediments. They were deposited by ashfalls, and also there are lake deposits in between. And this is a photograph of the same neck of the woods. So the other thing about these ashfall and lacustrine tuffs is that they host hydrothermal springs, and in the springs are the only black fire opals found in North America. So local lore from that time period says that cowboys picked up these opals and stuck them in their pockets and rode into Denio and bought drinks with them. Great story, but who knows? They would have had more opals than they would have had cash, probably. We know that Dixon spent time here. He painted this image called The Opal Mine, which was published in Don Haggerty's first book, the 2010 book of the paintings. And this painting is from close to Rainbow Ridge Mine. It reminds us of this place, which is right there, which we call Flora's Dugout. And that place, that claim was staked by a woman named Flora Lockheed, who was at that time a well-known journalist and novelist from San Francisco. She was sent to the opal fields in 1915 by the San Francisco Chronicle to record the discovery of this big, huge new opal. Fell in love with the valley, decided to stay here. She became known as the Opal Queen and filed as many as 15 claims and actually bought the Rainbow Ridge Mine. and owned that for a period of time. She dug opals in the summer and then sent them, she had a partner, she and her partner sent them to be made into jewelry, and they were sold at her tea room and gem shop in Santa Barbara, California, for quite some time, apparently. She stayed there as long as she could possibly stay. Her son, Alan Lockheed, who was one of the founders of the Lockheed Corporation, insisted finally that she move out and go back to civilization. But she would have been 62 the summer of 1927, and it is an entertaining thought to think that she and Dixon might have crossed paths while he was out there painting. And there's his sketch of the claim post of Rainbow Ridge. So, after he painted enough around Virgin Valley, and it must have been really hot there in August, it's really hot there in August, but I speculate that he would have come up into the higher country west of the valley to paint images like this. This is Big Spring Butte. It's called Wild Horse Country, and it is now on the Sheldon Wildlife Refuge. And horses, again, were a constant part of the scene, and still are. He also may have made the sketches out here that resulted in this work, which he actually painted in his studio in San Francisco, according to Don Haggerty, who saw a series of preliminary sketches of parts of this image before it was put together. The different pieces of this image are out there, but they aren't, we can't put them together as one location. And so when I asked Don about that, he said, oh no, he put this together after he got back to his studio. So, all right. September. September is a hard time to find images that are signed by Dixon. I can't find any that were signed, that were finished in September. And maybe the reason was that Humboldt County, and this part of Humboldt County, was the coldest place in the country in mid-September, averaging in the mid-20s, which you've got to think that oil painting would be a challenge outside in that weather, and even watercolors would not be so easy if your water was frozen in the morning. So, I mean, we don't know. It was cold, and there weren't a lot of pictures. Oh, also, Cornelius Vanderbilt Jr. visited the ranch in September. So that was Scrugham's, the last thing that I have found that publicized the fact that his venture was happening, whatever it was. By mid-October, Dixon and Tobin had rolled their bedrolls and returned to Winnemucca. Dixon's Reno exhibitions showcased 51 paintings and drawings that he had finished while he was based at Alder Creek. And then, so he had the exhibition at the Riverside, and then another at, Anne, help me, the Latimer Art Club. Okay. 20th Century Club. Both in mid-October. And immediately thereafter, he headed back to San Francisco and Civilization. And there was great acclaim, lots of commentary in the paper. And let's see, Beatrice Judd Ryan, who, according to Linda Gordon, who was Dorothea Lange's biographer in Dorothea Lange, A Life Beyond Limits, says, Beatrice Judd Ryan, an adventurous Australian widow, had become Maynard Dixon's benefactor. She had opened the Gallery Beaux-Arts in San Francisco in 1925, which that place became a key location for modern art in San Francisco between 1925 and 1933. quote unquote, a vital alternative to the now conservative art exhibits at the Bohemian Club and the source of a good proportion of Dixon's sales. Oh, also, if you look at this painting, you know that looks like wild horse country, doesn't it? Frank went back to camp tending, back to the ranch. After the catastrophe of the Depression drove many ranches into bankruptcy, he appears to have gone to work managing properties that had been taken over by banks, which in turn went into receivership. Somebody still had to feed the cows and shear the sheep because the animals were all still there. He was still in touch with Dixon in 1935, as evidenced by this excerpted letter, which you can read upstairs. Dear Dixon, I am now living in McDermott, running a string of sheep outfits for a closed bank. I was awfully glad to hear from you and would like to have you come up and stay with us, but at present I am mouthing out and culling about 13,000 ewes and will be on the trail for the next couple of weeks. To show you how much we are looking forward to your visit, we are building a new barn to squat behind and go over old times. We have a little heller now, aged 5, whom you will be glad to meet. Bring your sketchbook. You might get something good. Yours, Frank. Well, no, wait a minute. So, Scruggum sold his interest in the ranch in 1929 to his partner, Bill Dressler, who kept it until 1938. A lot of things have changed out in the ranching world and in the landscape itself, but some things are still the same. And this view of the mountain, which he painted as mountains in sunset light, is just as it was in 1927. So, thank you. So happy to take questions if there are any about any of that stuff. I think Caitlin has a couple of microphones.
Bonnie has one on the other side over there as well, so.
I know it's a lot of information.
Where was Maynard Dixon born, and what was his education?
So he was born in Fresno, I want to say, and he quit. He went to I think Ann's going to have to help me with this too, the California School of Design, and quit because they were too, old-fashioned. And he did a lot of his work, just by himself. He was just a genius at, visualizing, translating a visual image into a two-dimensional illustration, and did all kinds of illustrations for the first couple of decades of his career.
Can you tell us the background on how Tobin and Dixon met?
Well, it is pretty speculative. Like Haggerty says, Don Haggerty found some kind of correspondence somewhere that he surmised indicated that Scruggum was in San Francisco and was at Dixon's studio, and somehow they got together. He was a big-time politician. He was getting ready, Scruggum was getting ready in 1927 to become part of the whole Colorado River water project for the Department of Interior. And so he had lots of important connections, political connections. And the San Francisco society that Dixon was moving in had those folks, in it to one degree or another. So, it's speculation, but that's the best I can come up with. Because why else, I don't know. And Dixon did go back and forth to Carson City and paint around that part of Nevada too. And when he left Reno, I want to say he did, or maybe when he left Winnemucca, he went back to Reno with Governor Scrugham in that fall for a little while.
So when I was in Los Angeles teaching art, I came across a wonderful book by Linda and possibly you that was of the area that you're speaking about, the Dufurrena Ranch. Do you remember that book?
I do. So that book is 50 miles from home,
Yes,
right in the
that
long
was
circle
it.
on
I
a
was
Nevada
too-
Family Ranch. I finally found you. Yes, we put that, it's a photo essay
Yeah, it
book.
was
and we
wonderful.
put it together in,
Because I had been
Long time
from this area and I was down in LA and I just, I have to have that book. So I
it is
bought the
that, it is
Wonderful.
about those places.
Yes.
Yep,
And is the Dufurrena name Basque?
it is.
Oh, it is.
It is.
Oh, okay.
My husband's grandmother and grandfather came from two little villages on opposite sides of the Spanish and French border. So Spanish Basque, French Basque, but they got along.
I want to thank you so much for your information. I'm a docent here, and it was very, very nice to get this type of information.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that.
I mean, Ann Wolf's done a wonderful job, but you gave us some inside information we hadn't heard.
Inside, yeah, gossip.
I was just going to add another part of your story to the end of the 1927 return to Reno, since you were talking about James Scrugham. So another connection is Lorenzo Latimer, who was the painter out of San Francisco who founded the Latimer Arts Club here in northern Nevada, and they met every fall. And so Maynard Dixon and Lang that year were guests of the Latimer Art Club at the 20th Century building downtown where they had the big dinner. Scrugham was a part of that. And it was also the year of the 1927 Transcontinental Highway Exposition, which was when all of Idlewild Park was built and developed, and it was sort of Reno's version of the World's Fair, of the World's Fair to celebrate the opening of the new highway. So there was a lot of energy at that time around how art could be used as a tool to sort of elevate the stature of Reno. So all of the civic leaders, as well as Scrugham, were very involved in that enterprise in 1927. And so we told a lot of that story in the Latimer Arts Club history. And of course, the Latimer Arts Club is then the founding volunteer organization of the Nevada Museum of Art. So it's all tied into that sort of very active period there, 1927 to 1931.
It's all woven together. Thanks, Anne. Well, I really, really appreciate seeing all of you here today. It's been just a treat for me, and this has been a great project to just put together bits and pieces of things that I know about this beautiful part of our state. So I'm happy to share it with you all. Thanks again for coming.